So this morning I noticed a story on the situation in Lebanon, which I actually haven't looked at in quite a while. Some of you who've been following this channel for a while might remember that I discussed a couple times the ongoing financial crisis that was unfolding in Lebanon a few months ago, and how it was a good example of very bad monetary policy when you don't have sort of the political and military chops to account for that, like say we do here in the U.S. It was an example of a country like Lebanon that doesn't have a lot of international clout, that can't use its global political influence to essentially impose its currency on others and create markets and have all this institutional advantage for them. And so when a country like Lebanon decides to run up a bunch of government debt and start paying people by printing money because they don't have the real resources in terms of tax revenue to pay their bills, well, then it devalues their currency. And matters were made even worse in Lebanon because Lebanon has a fixed exchange rate regime, which is something that's always kind of complicated, I think, and hard to explain to people who are not, into monetary theory and things like that. But basically, the way that Lebanon set up their currency some 20 years ago, I think it was in '99, maybe a little earlier, they set a fixed exchange rate for the Lebanese pound at something like 1,500 pounds to $1. And they made this easy, and smooth because I guess that the way the economy works in Lebanon is that dollars and the local currency, the pound, get used both commonly in transactions. Probably has a lot to do with Lebanon having a very big immigrant population that works in other countries and sends money home in form of remunerations, and so a likely international currency that they might be sending home is the U.S. dollar. Another one would be the euro, I'm sure, but I don't think the euro existed when Lebanon set up this whole regime, so they used dollars. And so in Lebanon, you have pounds and you have dollars floating around. And so in order for prices to remain, sort of easy to understand so that your economy isn't based on people having to constantly check whatever the exchange rate is at a given moment, you need to make sure that if you have two currencies floating around that they are constantly trading at a consistent rate. And so the way to do that, if you really wanted the pound to equal a specific set amount of dollars, is the central bank should hold an amount of dollars that is equal to the amount of Lebanese pounds in circulation, so that if anyone ever wants to exchange those pounds for dollars, they can just go to the central bank or their commercial bank that they use and exchange the pounds that they have for dollars. The pound should act as a certificate for dollars. And so if you're going to have a fixed exchange rate like this, the only honest way to do it is so that the pound literally represents a given value of, in dollars. Lebanon at that point would essentially be on a dollar standard, which they almost are anyway. That's the idea that they were going for, is that Lebanon would be on a dollar standard in the same way that a lot of countries used to be on a gold standard. But I guess the Lebanese government didn't want to give up the ability to conduct so-called monetary policy in which they decide to print up their currency and devalue it. And so what they did was they just created an artificial fixed exchange rate to where it exists that way really in terms of the law, and the central bank is there to try and make sure that on the free market that the two currencies trade as close to that fixed exchange rate as possible. And so there really is no direct link between these two prices that is keeping it stabilized, other than the machinations of the central bank. So if the Lebanese central bank has to print up however many pounds to help cover the government deficit to monetize their debt, and I don't know if necessarily what the dynamics are, but obviously in Lebanon they're having a problem to where they are they have an increased amount of Lebanese pounds versus the amount of dollars. And so when you have more pounds relative to dollars in the system, well then obviously the value of those pounds are going to go down. You're going to have more pounds chasing fewer dollars. And actually, I think the way that they blame it in this case, and they say, oh, well, it's not because we're printing money. It's because there's just less dollars. There aren't as many dollars coming into the system. And while I'm sure that is exacerbating the problem, if they were on a true dollar standard, then what I'm talking about wouldn't be an issue, because every time that someone went, and deposited a U.S. dollar in the bank, they would get 1,500 Lebanese pounds back. And so the quantity of pounds in circulation should be directly tied to the quantity of dollars in Lebanon, or rather directly tied to the quantity of dollars on reserve in Lebanese banks. Because for each dollar that is held by someone, each dollar bill, that should be 1,500 Lebanese pounds that are not in circulation. So you could never have this problem to where there's too many pounds chasing too few dollars. In reality, though, that is not the case. And so we've seen, over the past few months, cost of living rise substantially in Lebanon. And the pound's exchange rate to the dollar has risen from 1,500 pounds to $1 to somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,000 pounds to the dollar. And I think just 2 weeks ago it was only 3,000 pounds to the dollar. So the inflation here is accelerating. And so let's say that you were making a fixed wage. Well, then you've seen in the last 2 weeks your income declined by about 1/3. I think I'm doing the math in my head correctly, because it's gone. The exchange rate's gone up another 1,000 pounds, and 1,000, of course, is 1/3 of 3,000. And of course, since the exchange rate started collapsing, you've certainly lost more than half of your income. And so people are understandably upset. A few months ago, when I was first talking about this problem, when the inflation was not nearly this bad, there were people out in the streets protesting and wanting to bring about the fall of their government, which of course is something I always tend to cheer on. I'm very happy to see people who rise up against their government. Of course, normally what they replace it with is just as bad, if not worse, but at least there's that glimmer of hope there for a little bit. Interestingly enough, though, in this case, the Lebanese government is actually going out and attacking their central bank and blaming them for the inflation. But of course, it seems that the tact that the prime minister in Lebanon is taking is the incorrect one, because what he seems to be angry about is that the central bank is not doing enough to try and prop up their currency artificially. They're not doing enough of these machinations, whereas the fact of the matter is that you have this system. It's not a very good system, but there's nothing you can do to really save it. You should just let your currency depreciate to whatever the proper exchange rate is at this point, because the reality is that Lebanon is not operating on a dollar standard. They have a fiat currency, the Lebanese pound, which trades on the open market with the dollar as another fiat currency. It is impossible at this point to say that the Lebanese pound is somehow tied directly to the dollar. If you wanted to operate on a dollar standard and have a very stable exchange rate, then you should have done what I suggested earlier. Of course, I'm not a genius. I didn't come up with this. This was the way that the old gold standard used to work. But the Lebanese authorities clearly did not choose that path, and so they've made their bed, and now they need to lie in it. You can blame the dollar shortage and the lack of remunerations for your woes all you want, but you backed yourselves into this corner. And of course, even before all of the Wu flu shutdowns, this crisis was unfolding. The lockdowns and all that, and the complete halt of the global economy has only exacerbated the problems to the point to where now there's little to none or to no dollars flowing into the country. And so out of all the governments around the world that are facing, civil unrest right now, I think that Lebanon is probably one of the most likely countries to see some form of regime change at this point, or at least, resignation of the current government, because they were already in dire straits to begin with. There were already people out in the streets protesting against this government. And people in Lebanon who are protesting don't seem to really care about the lockdown. They're out anyway. They're doing the French-style thing of setting up roadblocks. I guess that might be some kind of a legacy of the French imperial rule there. They've adopted some of the worst aspects of French culture. But of course, it's justified in this case. I mean, it's really inexcusable what's going on. But sadly, there is no silver bullet. That you cannot just make the pain go away. I mean, you can have as many prime ministers resign as you want, and the pain is still going to come. So with that said, if you gain anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day, and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.